It is said that before Angkor has a name, it has a silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that gathers, patiently, deliberately, like incense in a sealed chamber. Before dawn, when the jungle still sleeps under its own damp breath, the temple is only a silhouette pressed against the paling sky. Its towers rise like lotus buds sealed in night, not yet open to the day, not yet warmed by color, and the world around it feels hushed, as if the earth itself has chosen to speak more softly here. Beneath the silence, the moat lies wide and still. It holds the sky the way a calm eye holds secret, reflecting starlight with such gentleness that even the constellations seem afraid to move. The water does not glitter, it listens. In its dark mirror, the temple appears twice, once as stone, once as a trembling reflection. Two Angkors, one above, one below, as if the place has always belonged to both worlds. You begin at the first threshold, the causeway. It feels less like a road and more like a vow. The stones are worn smooth by centuries of quiet arrivals, pilgrims, monks, travelers, and those whose names dissolved long ago into dust. Each step forward carries the weight of unseen footsteps. Each pause feels like an offering. Whispers tell us Angkor Wat watches time, not only because it endures, though it does, with a patience almost beyond imagining, but because it seems to measure the sun and hold its path in stone. The temple faces west, a rare turning for Khmer sanctuaries, as if it chose the direction of dusk, the direction of endings. Some have wondered, softly and without certainty, whether this was a temple meant for the living, or a house prepared for the dead, a tomb for a king, a doorway for an ancestor, a place where the final light is not feared, but honored. And so the question arrives, gentle as the first breeze across water. Was Angkor Wat built as a house for a god, a tomb for a king, or a map for something older than either? The towers do not answer. They rise in calm symmetry. 5 peaks like a sacred mountain made visible, a stone echo of Mount Meru, the mythic center of the world. Here, architecture is not merely shelter. It is cosmology. It is devotion made measurable. Yet nothing about the place feels like a boast. Even grandeur is softened by the early mist, by the wet leaves, by the faint scent of earth and distant incense, drifting from unseen hands. As dawn draws closer, the temple begins to reveal details the night kept hidden. Carved corridors unfold like quiet scripture. Reliefs run along the walls in endless procession. Celestial beings, churning oceans, spirals of myth, battles frozen in stone. But the carvings are not loud. They do not shout their meaning. They simply remain, as if waiting for the right kind of attention. Where memory fades, stone becomes a language. It is a slow language, spoken in texture and shadow. Apsaras, heavenly dancers, stand poised forever mid-breath, their faces serene, their eyes turned slightly away, as if listening to music no living ear can hear. Naga serpents curl along balustrades, guardians of passage, their bodies worn by rain and touch, their mouths open in a silent warning that feels more ceremonial than cruel. Enter carefully. Enter quietly. History here does not arrive as a lecture. It arrives as layers. A king in the early 12th century, Suryavarman II, commissioned this vast stone prayer, dedicating it to Vishnu. The temple was a Hindu sanctuary at its birth, humming with the names of gods carried on smoke and chant. And yet, centuries turned, and devotion shifted like river currents. Buddhism came, not as a violent severing, but as a gentle revoicing, new prayers settling into old chambers, new offerings placed beneath ancient carvings, without breaking the temple's calm pulse. This is the sacred contradiction Angkor holds so effortlessly. A Hindu temple that became a Buddhist sanctuary without losing its original breath, as if the stone itself is not loyal to a single name, but to reverence, whatever form it takes in the dark. And perhaps that is why Angkor Wat feels alive, even when it is quiet, because it does not belong to one moment. It belongs to the act of returning. The air changes as you move deeper. The corridors cool. The light thins. The outside world, birds, water, leaves, falls away until all that remains is the sound of your own breath and the faint sense of being watched, not by something hostile, but by something ancient and attentive. Marked by the moon, the temple seems to hold two kinds of time: the time of sun and season, and the deeper time of stone, slow, vast, almost unreadable. And then, as if the temple is guiding you toward the edge of knowing, you reach a doorway framed by darkness. Carved guardians stand on either side, forever mid-sentence. Their faces are worn, their edges softened by centuries of rain, yet their presence is unshaken. They do not block the way. They simply stand, as if asking you to step forward, without demanding you understand. The darkness beyond is not empty. It is a chamber of possibility, a gate that does not promise answers, only deeper silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, in the way people think of finding. Perhaps Angkor Wat is not a riddle to solve, but a listening place, where the most important truths are not spoken aloud. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the first light gathers behind the towers, the temple remains, quiet, watchful, and unfinished in its meaning, like a candle flame trembling on the edge of sleep. It is said the first lesson Angkor teaches is not carved in stone. It is poured. Water arrives before the temple does, still, wide, and patient, lying around Angkor Wat like a deliberate veil. Before dawn, the moat is not merely a boundary. It is a quiet ocean drawn from myth, a ring of hush that holds the sanctuary apart from ordinary ground. The jungle breathes behind you, damp and slow, yet here at the water's edge, even the leaves seem to pause, as if listening for something that moves beneath reflection. Beneath the silence, the moat becomes a mirror. Starlight settles on its surface like pale dust, star-marked and trembling, each constellation held gently, as though the sky has been placed here to rest. The water does not shimmer with excitement. It simply receives. It keeps. It remembers. And as you walk along the edge, where lotus leaves float like small green prayers, and dragonflies write brief, bright spells above the surface, a thought rises softly, like mist from a river. Why was this water made so vast? Why was it shaped so precisely? Whispers tell us Angkor was more than a temple. It is a world rendered in stone. At its heart rises the image of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of cosmic order, its towers lifting like lotus buds toward a heaven that cannot be reached by hands alone. Around it, the moat becomes the world sea, the oceanic ring that surrounds the divine axis in ancient imagination. Here, cosmology is not spoken in scrolls. It is built. Here, the universe is not described. It is walked. The causeway leads across water like a quiet bridge between realms. Each step feels measured, as if the builders wanted the pilgrim's body to learn the same discipline as the stars. The geometry is gentle but unyielding, straight lines, balanced distances, mirrored forms. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is casual. Even the air feels arranged. And yet, beneath the sacred symbolism, another mystery hums. Not loud enough to disturb the calm, only persistent, like a slow drum under a chant. What fear or faith required a universe to be carved into a single place? A moat is protection, yes. But Angkor's moat does not feel like a defensive trench alone. It feels like separation, like consecration, like a careful boundary drawn around something that must remain untouched by ordinary time. Water can guard without anger. Water can keep the world at a respectful distance. And water can erase. Where memory fades, footprints vanish first. The edge of the moat is soft with reeds and moss, with damp stone and pale lichen. If you step too close, the ground gives way to mud, quiet, swallowing. It does not resist. It simply takes what is offered and smooths it back into stillness. The moat, in its patience, teaches the empire's most intimate truth. Nothing, not even greatness, can hold its shape forever. Yet Angkor tried. Angkor Wat was built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, dedicated to Vishnu, an immense offering shaped into towers, corridors, and sacred courtyards. It was a statement, yes, but not the kind shouted by banners. It was spoken through proportion, through alignment, through the careful placing of water and stone, as though the kingdom itself was kneeling before the heavens. A sanctuary and a declaration, a prayer and a proof. But the soft contradiction remains, drifting like fog across the water. A monument meant to endure, built in a land where the jungle is always waiting to reclaim. Even now, beyond the moat's quiet edge, trees gather like watchers. Roots press toward stone. Leaves fall and dissolve into the damp earth. Rain comes and comes again, as if repeating an old ritual. The temple stands, but the living world never stops approaching, slowly, politely, endlessly. At night, the moat becomes something else. The world grows darker, and the water grows deeper in meaning. Moonlight lays a pale path across the surface, and the towers become a shadow behind their own reflection. Stone above, stone below, each one softened by mist. The boundary between sky and temple begins to dissolve. The listener feels it almost physically, as if Angkor is not only in the world, but holding the world inside itself. Marked by the moon, the moat seems to keep two kinds of truth. One is visible, water as design, as protection, as part of sacred architecture. The other is felt, water as veil, as if the temple is surrounded not only by an ocean of myth, but by a quiet warning. Approach slowly, approach with reverence. Do not demand too much, because the moat does not merely reflect what is there. It reflects what the mind brings to it. A restless mind sees only distance. A hungry mind sees only obstacle. But a listening mind begins to sense something softer, that the moat is not a barrier made to keep you out. It is a threshold made to change you before you enter. And so the chapter lingers here, at the waterline, where lotus leaves tremble and dragonflies vanish into dusk, where the temple rises beyond reflection like a patient mountain. A faint bird calls from far away, thin, solitary, and then the sound is swallowed by fog, and a final question is left unforced, like a candle flame trembling but not extinguished. If the water is a sacred border, what exactly is it keeping out? And what might it be keeping in? Perhaps it was never meant to be answered. Perhaps it was only meant to be carried, quietly, into sleep. It is said there's a library in Angkor Wat that holds no paper, no ink, no fragile scrolls that crackle and vanish with fire. Instead, its stories are pressed into stone, vast and patient, kept in corridors where the air is warm, where centuries have passed like slow breaths in a sealed chamber. You enter as if stepping into a memory that has been waiting, unblinking, beneath the weight of time. The first image is a corridor of carvings. Stone becomes a slow-moving dream along the walls, endless scenes unfolding in quiet procession, like pages that never turn yet never stop speaking. Torchlight, real or imagined, drifts across the reliefs and makes shadows tremble in the grooves. The figures seem to stir only because your eyes are learning their rhythm. Beneath the silence, you begin to understand. This temple does not explain itself in words. It speaks in images, and it speaks a great deal. Along one wall, the world is churning. A carved ocean rises in spirals and coils. A sea that never existed in water, yet feels real enough to taste. Salt in myth and moonlit distance. Gods and demons pull at a serpent, and the motion becomes a circle, and the circle becomes an echo. The scene is known, whispered across centuries. The churning of the ocean of milk, a cosmic labor to draw out immortality from the deep. Yet here, inside Angkor's stone throat, the story feels less like entertainment and more like instruction. A warning, because the ocean is not calm. It is being forced to yield something precious. And when a universe is carved into a wall, the message is never only about the gods. The reliefs stretch onward, battles carved with disciplined precision, ranks of figures arranged as if order itself were sacred. There are chariots and banners and bodies in motion, yet the corridor remains quiet. The violence is muted by stone. The roar is swallowed by centuries. And still, the images linger with a strange weight, as though reminding the listener that even empires, especially empires, fight the same invisible battle against disappearance. Whispers tell us this was not merely decoration. A king commissioned Angkor Wat in the early 12th century, Suryavarman II, dedicating it to Vishnu, anchoring his reign in divine order. A civilization wove myth into architecture until myth became law, and law became stone. The bas-reliefs did not only beautify a holy place, they declared a cosmic legitimacy, an empire's right to exist under the gaze of the heavens. Yet the mystery remains gentle and persistent, like a low chant beneath a candle flame. Why does this temple speak so much in images? Why do some scenes feel like warnings rather than stories? As you drift deeper into the galleries, the air cools slightly. Dust hangs in thin layers, star-marked in the shafts of light that slip through high openings. The corridor feels like a chamber of memory, veiled, sacred, and carefully kept. And then you meet them, the apsaras, carved dancers, heavenly, serene, standing in endless procession along the walls. Each one is frozen mid-gesture, as if the music paused but the devotion did not. Their ornaments are detailed, their hair arranged with impossible patience, their faces calm as moonlit water. Yet their gazes are slightly elsewhere, as though listening to something beyond the listener, beyond the corridor, beyond time. Where memory fades, beauty remains, though it changes. The stone holds starlight in its pores. The dancer's smiles soften under weathering, not abruptly, but with the slow mercy of rain. Their edges blur in places, as if the temple itself is exhaling them back into silence. You find yourself tracing the air near the carved lines, not touching, not taking, only hovering close enough to feel the coldness of the relief like a sacred boundary. The bas-reliefs begin to feel like a language you almost remember, not because you can translate it, but because it speaks to something older than understanding. Rhythm, repetition, symbol, spiral, oceanic scenes, celestial processions, wars etched without sound, a library of images that does not ask to be solved, only entered. And then the contradiction rises like incense, soft, unmistakable. The empire that carved eternity into walls eventually faded into vines and silence. The jungle waited. It always does. Rain returned. Roots pressed toward stone. The capital shifted, power thinned, and the great city's heartbeat slowed until the world outside began to forget the shape of this place. Yet inside these corridors, the carved pages remained, patient, uncomplaining, holding their stories even when no one came to read them. As the chapter nears its end, the corridor narrows in your attention to a single figure, one apsara. Her face is worn by time, her smile almost gone, erased not by violence, but by centuries of gentle weathering. And still, her presence lingers. Her posture remains poised. Her gaze remains turned slightly away, as if she is watching something moving just beyond the edge of sight. Beneath the silence, you sense the forbidden suggestion, without needing it spoken. Perhaps the carvings are not decoration at all. Perhaps they are script meant to be read by time itself. Perhaps the walls were made to outlast human memory, so that even when names vanish, the temple can still whisper its truths into the slow ear of the universe. And as the torchlight fades, real or imagined, and the corridor returns to shadow, the library closes without a sound. No final answer is offered. Only the lingering feeling that some stories are not meant to end. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps it was never meant to be found in full daylight at all. It is said the sun returns to Angkor the way a prayer returns to the lips. Not as a spectacle, not as a triumph, but as a ritual finding its place again, quietly, faithfully, threading light through the same ancient spaces, as if the morning itself remembers the path. Before the first gold appears, the temple is still a silhouette, a soft geometry against a brightening veil of dusk sky blue, its towers like lotus buds waiting to open. The air is cool, damp with the jungle's breath, and the moat holds the last stars with patient calm. Everything feels suspended, as though the world is holding its own breath for the smallest shift in light. Then it begins. A pale line appears behind the central towers, so gentle it could be mistaken for mist brightening. And slowly, light spills into the sky, not rushing, not pressing, only arriving, like a lantern lifted behind a curtain. Beneath the silence, towers seem to catch it, not randomly, not roughly, but with a strange devotion, as though Angkor Wat has been waiting, day after day, century after century, to meet the sun at precisely this angle. The listener watches as the silhouette sharpens for a moment, and the temple's outline becomes a sacred instrument, measuring dawn without numbers, receiving the morning without words. Whispers tell us this is not accident. Angkor Wat was shaped with an intimacy toward the heavens that still unsettles the mind when it grows quiet enough to notice. Certain days, solstice days, equinox days, carry a particular alignment of light and shadow. The temple seems to remember them, holding their patterns like an old chant held in stone. It is not a machine, not a calculation. It is a listening place, a monument that learned the sun's habits and built itself in response. And the question rises gently like incense. How did stone become so intimate with starlight and seasons? You move inward. The heat of the day has not yet arrived, so the passages remain cool, shadowed corridors where the air feels older, and each step seems to stir faint echoes from the floor. The stone beneath you is worn smooth in places, polished by centuries of quiet feet. Not loud footsteps, not hurried ones, only the slow arrivals of pilgrims, monks, caretakers, travelers, and those who came with offerings small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Where memory fades, the body remembers. The corridor holds a hush that is not empty. It feels layered, like dust settling in a chamber, like breath lingering after prayer. Relief carvings line the walls, softened by time, their figures caught in frozen motion, as if the temple is always mid-ritual. And then the light returns, not as blaze, but as threads. Thin shafts slide through openings above, falling across the stone in narrow bands. Dust motes drift through them, like tiny stars. The beams are so quiet, so precise. They feel like something woven rather than cast. Sacred time here is not told. It is shown. The mind begins to sense that the temple is not simply oriented toward the sun. It is in conversation with it. The builders shaped corridors and thresholds so that light would arrive in certain ways, at certain times, touching certain stones, like a hand returning to familiar places. Myth and memory braid together in the dimness. Gods walk the sky in old stories, their steps measured by the turning of heaven. Kings, too, sought to bind themselves to that turning, to anchor rule in what cannot be argued with. Sunrise seasons, the steady orbit of the visible world. In the 12th century, under Surya Varman II, Angkor Wat rose as a vast devotion to Vishnu, an attempt to place the kingdom within cosmic order, to make legitimacy feel as permanent as the sun's return. Yet the chapter does not become technical, because the temple does not feel technical. It feels ceremonial. The light in the corridor is not merely illumination. It is presence. It arrives like a blessing, like a sign that the heavens still see this place. And then, softly, the contradiction surfaces, like a ripple in still water. If the temple was meant to mirror the cosmos, what happens when the empire collapses? The empire did fade. Power shifted. The city's heart quieted. The jungle pressed closer. Names changed. Prayers changed. The temple endured, yes, but the hands that built it became dust, and the voices that first sang within these chambers dissolved into silence. Does the cosmos remain, indifferent, continuing its silent orbit? The answer does not arrive. Instead, you step back toward the outer light, and the sunrise reaches its final moment of ignition. The towers, once dark, now glow like embered crowns, faded copper and sandstone yellow warmed by gold. Mist softens the edges. The whole temple looks briefly like a vision held between worlds, solid, yet dreamlike, eternal, yet fragile. And in that glow, you feel what Angkor has always offered, not conquest over time, but reverence before it. Perhaps Angkor Wat was not built to command the sun, only to witness it, only to kneel before it day after day, as the thread of morning turns again and again through the quiet loom of stone, and as the light grows fuller, less mysterious, more ordinary, The sacred moment does not vanish harshly. It fades. It returns to hush. A distant bird calls once, thin and far away, and the sound dissolves into the warm air like a last drifting prayer. Perhaps it was never meant to be held. Perhaps it was only meant to be seen, briefly, before sleep arrives. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said the first story we learn is rarely the deepest one. It arrives like a whisper of names, soft, practiced, repeated until it feels as steady as stone. Suryavarman II, a king at the height of Angkor's power, the one who dreamed in sandstone and made devotion visible. The version most often told begins here, as if history can be held in a single hand. A ruler who commissions a temple, an empire that gathers its strength, a monument that rises like a sacred mountain from the flat breadth of the land. And so the listener is guided into the official story. The labor is gathered. The quarries yield their blocks. The causeways are laid like vows across water. The central towers lift, symmetrical and sure, as if the world can be persuaded into order by geometry alone. The temple is dedicated to Vishnu, and the empire speaks to the heavens in proportions that feel both human and impossibly calm. But beneath the silence, something stirs behind the grandeur. Not a contradiction shouted, but shadow that refuses to leave the corner of the room. Why do some details feel incomplete, like a page missing from a sacred book? The official version is smooth. It is a polished threshold. Yet when you step closer, when you let your eyes rest on the stone itself, you begin to notice the places where certainty softens. Here a tool mark remains, a small groove where a chisel once bit into sandstone, the gesture still visible long after the hand is turned to dust. The stone holds the trace the way a shell holds the memory of the sea. It is a human signature without a name, a quiet insistence that this temple was not built by myth alone. There a threshold is worn smooth, not by kings, but by countless bare feet, pilgrims, monks, caretakers, workers returning through the same doorway again and again until the edge rounded into gentleness. You can almost feel it under your own step, the slow erosion of time, the soft polishing of devotion, the way repetition becomes ritual. Whispers tell us to imagine the builders not as a crowd, but as breaths in the dark, hands lifting stone in heat, so thick it felt like cloth, voices chanting low, not for spectacle, but to keep rhythm. One block, one pull, one measured pause. The fatigue of the body turning, slowly, into a kind of offering. Not because work is holy by itself, but because the intention behind it can be. In the most often told story, the temple is inevitable. In the quieter story, it is unbelievably human. A coordination of bodies and seasons. A discipline of patience. An architecture made not only from design, but from endurance. Historical context appears like lantern light in a corridor. Angkor was vast, an empire of waterworks and fields, of reservoirs that caught the monsoon and canals that guided life across the land. Power here was not only in armies, but in the control of rain and river, in the ability to shape the breathing of the earth into harvest. Religion and rule braided together. Kings anchored themselves in cosmic order, and temples became both devotion and declaration. Yet the stone does not feel satisfied with declaration alone. How can a place so monumental still feel like it is listening for something? Perhaps because even at its peak, the empire knew the truth that all empires know but rarely speak aloud. Nothing stands forever without a cost. Nothing remains unchallenged by drought, by shifting rivers, by time that does not care what is carved into walls. The official story glows under sunlight, but in the shadows, questions gather like mist. What ceremonies were performed here that were never recorded? What anxieties hid behind the confident symmetry? What names were spoken by workers in the dark, names we will never recover? Where memory fades, silence becomes a second architect. It builds its own corridors inside the mind. And so, as you move through Angkor Wat, past carvings and steps and chambers that hold the scent of damp stone, you begin to feel the most often told version gently loosen in your hands. Not because it's false, but because it is only one layer. A single voice in a chamber of echoes. The temple itself seems to understand this. It stands without insisting. It offers its clues without forcing conclusions. It allows the official story to exist while keeping other stories veiled, like relics wrapped in cloth, waiting for the right kind of attention. At the end of the chapter, the version most often told is placed gently on the ground, as if setting down an offering. A king, a commission, a great temple rising. Yes, and still the listener remains aware of what cannot be held so neatly. That history is not a single voice, but a chamber, each retelling an echo. Some echoes are loud enough to become official. Others are quieter, living in tool marks and worn thresholds, in the smoothness of a stair under bare feet, in the dust that gathers in corners no storyteller visits. Somewhere inside that echo, another story waits. Unclaimed, unwritten. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully found. Perhaps it only asks this, to be listened to softly, as sleep approaches, until the names fade, and the stone remains, holding its silence like a sacred flame. It is said the temple changes its breath when you choose to go deeper. Not all at once, no sudden door, no sharp command, only a subtle shift in air. The corridor narrows, the stone cools, the sounds of the outer world, water, leaves, distant birds, begin to soften, as if they are being wrapped in cloth and carried away. And with each step you feel it. You are moving inward not only through architecture, but through layers of mind. Beneath the silence, Angkor Wat becomes less like a monument and more like a passage, a path that asks for intention. The stairways begin. They are steep, deliberately so, rising at angles that make the body pay attention. Each step is a small decision. Each pause a quiet confession of human weight. The stone underfoot is rough at the edges, worn smooth where countless feet have pressed the same places again and again. It is not a comfortable ascent. It is a ritual climb. And the question that follows you is simple, potent, and strangely tender. Why is the holiest space so difficult to reach? Perhaps because holiness, in this place, is not given freely like sunlight. Perhaps it is approached like a secret. The climb draws you away from the ordinary world. You imagine the outer courtyards, the marketplace of life beyond the moat, the river roads, the wide breathing fields, and you feel them recede, not in distance, but in relevance. The further you rise, the less they matter. The temple is quietly training your attention, guiding it away from noise and towards something narrower, calmer, more exact. Where memory fades, the body becomes the map. You feel the incline in your calves, the coolness of stone against your palm if you steady yourself. You feel the hush thickening, as if the air has weight, and the corridors, shadowed, carved, patient, seem to hold centuries like dust in a sealed chamber. This is sacred hierarchy, made physical. Outer spaces for the many, inner chambers for the few, not as exclusion for pride, but as a gradual stripping away. As though the temple believes that what is most intimate should not be met in haste. Myth threads through the architecture as gently as smoke. Mount Meru rises again in your imagination, the sacred mountain at the center of the world, where gods dwell above human noise. Angkor Wat was shaped to echo that cosmic form, its towers lifting like a stone prayer toward a realm beyond reach. You can almost sense the old intention. To ascend is to approach order, to step closer to the axis where heaven and earth feel briefly aligned. And yet, even as you climb, the title of this chapter whispers its paradox, a long descent into the inner sanctuary, because the deeper you go, the more you feel something falling away inside you. Certainty, speed, the need to explain. It is as though the temple is not only raising your body, but lowering your mind into stillness, down through the surface thoughts into quieter chambers you rarely visit. The stairways narrow further. The stones feel older here, more intimate, as if they have been touched less often, but more reverently. Shadows gather in corners. A faint shaft of light slips through an opening above, catching dust motes that drift like tiny stars, star-marked and slow, turning the air into a living veil. Beneath the silence, you sense that the sanctuary ahead is both empty and full. Empty, because stone does not shout its meaning. Full, because the absence itself feels occupied by memory, by devotion, by the echo of prayers that once rose here like warm breath in the dark. This is the contradiction that persists like a soft ache. The innermost place feels as though it holds something unseen, not an object you can point to, not a treasure you can take, a presence, or perhaps only the possibility of presence, enough to make the heart quiet itself. You reach a higher terrace. Wind brushes the towers now, slipping between them like a whispered hymn. The air tastes different, cleaner, thinner, carrying the scent of distant leaves. When you look outward, the jungle spreads below like a sleeping animal, vast, green, and patient, its canopy rolling into misty horizons. From here, the world feels softened, as if it has been placed farther away so you can see it without being pulled by it. And still, the sanctuary is not quite a destination. It is a threshold, a doorway framed by stone and shadow, where carved guardians wait, not blocking, not welcoming, simply standing as witnesses to your approach. The darkness beyond does not offer a clear shape. It does not explain what it contains. It only asks you to enter with reverence. The final reflection does not declare what is found, only what is felt. A quiet vertigo, a sense that the temple is not merely a structure, but a stairway into your own hidden chambers, places inside you that are usually veiled, buried beneath noise and daylight. And as the wind continues its soft chant around the towers, and the jungle breathes below, you stand at the edge of that darkness, suspended between height and depth, between stone and sky. Perhaps it was never meant to be conquered. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully known. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And here, in the inner hush of Angkor, the echo is not loud. It is gentle. It is waiting. It is enough to carry you toward sleep. It is said that in certain temples, prayer does not end. It only changes its voice. The opening image is small, almost fragile against the age of stone, a saffron robe moving like a quiet flame through ancient shadow. Not a blaze, not a spectacle, just a warm color passing through cool corridors, as if dawn itself had taken a slower form. The air is dim and heavy with history, and the walls, carved, worn, patient, receive that color without surprise. Beneath the silence, Angkor Wat seems to recognize it, as though the temple has seen many kinds of devotion drift through its chambers, and has learned not to cling to any single name. Once, these halls belonged to Vishnu. Angkor Wat was raised in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, dedicated to the preserver god, shaped like Mount Meru and ringed by the oceanic motive myth. The reliefs spoke in Hindu stories, cosmic churning, celestial order, kings aligning themselves with heaven. The stone was a vow made visible, an empire pressing its prayer into architecture. And then the centuries turned. Not sharply. No single moment where a door slammed. No clean line where one world ended and another began. Instead, time did what it always does in sacred places. It softened the edges. Kingdoms shifted. Courts changed. New teachers arrived. New chants rose, not as invasion, but as tide. And the mystery hums gently, like incense in a sealed chamber. How can a place hold different gods, different names, and still feel like one unbroken breath? The corridors answer in their own way, by remaining calm. Incense smoke curls upward in the dimness, seeking the same high ceilings that once listened to other prayers. Offerings sit beneath faces older than the hands that placed them. Lotus flowers, small bowls, candle stubs worn down to quiet. The stone does not flinch. It does not reject. It receives, as it always has. Where memory fades, devotion adapts. The listener is guided through quiet acts of reverence that feel like a continuation rather than a replacement. A chant fades, another begins, and somewhere in the overlap, like dusk becoming night, the temple holds both without breaking its stillness. It is not that the old stories vanish. They simply become part of the chamber, part of the echo. Beneath the silence, the carvings remain. Apsaras dance forever along the walls, serene and slightly elsewhere. Celestial beings pull at serpent coils in ancient myth. Battle lines hold their frozen discipline. These images were pressed into stone with the particular cosmology in mind, an ordering of the universe that once felt certain enough to rule by. And yet now, in dim corners, Buddhist statues sit, calm, gentle, unhurried, beneath ceilings once meant for Vishnu's domain. This is the tender contradiction the chapter introduces, without forcing it. If the temple was built for one cosmology, why does it cradle another so naturally? Perhaps because the stone was never loyal to certainty. Perhaps it was loyal to the act of bowing. The temple's architecture still guides attention inward. The steep steps still test intention. The inner chambers still quiet the mind. The light still enters in thin shafts, catching dust motes that drift like small stars. The atmosphere remains sacred not because of a single doctrine, but because it has been shaped again and again by human hands choosing reverence over noise. Whispers tell us that empires often demand permanence, but prayer does not demand it. Prayer only asks for presence. The listener moves deeper, past reliefs that belong to one story, toward a dim sanctuary where another story sits in silence. Buddha faces glow faintly in torchlight, oxidized bronze tones and soft sandstone, calm eyes lowered, lips barely curved as if holding a secret kindness. Behind them, the carved ceilings, ancient, patterned, patient, remain, accepting the new occupant of the space as though this, too, was always possible. Nothing stays the same, and still something remains. The chapter's emotional arc holds that melancholy wonder. Kingdoms rise and fade, names change, the jungle waits at the edges, yet the quiet hunger for meaning persists. The temple becomes a vessel for that hunger, a chamber where different eras leave their breath behind. Beneath the silence, you feel the continuity not as doctrine, but as atmosphere. A place learning new prayers while keeping old doors open. A stone sanctuary that does not argue with time. As the chapter ends, the interior grows dimmer. The incense smoke thickens into a veil. The Buddhist statues sit beneath the older carvings, and the space feels both full and empty. Full of reverence, empty of answers. The final reflection arrives like a soft closing of eyelids. Perhaps the temple is not loyal to a single name. Perhaps it is loyal to devotion itself, whatever form it takes in the dark. And perhaps that is why Angkor still feels as if it breathes. Not because it speaks clearly, but because it listens. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And here, in the temple that changed its prayer, the echo is gentle enough to follow you into sleep, unfinished, sacred, and quietly alive. It is said you can hear Angkor even when you cannot see it. Not with the ears alone, with the skin, with the breath. The chapter opens with leaves, wind moving through the jungle like a slow inhale and exhale. The canopy stirs, not hurried, not restless, only breathing. Moist air drifts between trunks and vines. Droplets cling to broad green surfaces, like small, patient mirrors. And somewhere behind that living veil, stone waits in silence, as if it has agreed to be hidden. Beneath the silence, the jungle feels like a guardian, not a conqueror, not an enemy, a keeper. The listener's gaze widens beyond temple walls to the living world pressing close, roots that seek every crack, vines that hang like curtains, rain that returns with patient certainty. The jungle does not arrive like an invasion. It arrives the way time arrives, one soft layer at a time. And here the mystery begins to hum, gentle but persistent. How could a city of stone and water slip into forgotten green? How could an empire's heart become a rumor half swallowed by trees? Angkor was not a small place that vanished easily. It was powerful, organized, and vast. Its strength not only in temples, but in reservoirs and canals, in the careful guidance of monsoon water across fields. It was a civilization that measured itself against the cosmos, aligning stone to sun and story, shaping sacred order into architecture. And yet, even a cosmically aligned world must still answer to the earth. Where memory fades, nature does not forget. The chapter does not imagine abandonment as drama. No single night of flames, no loud collapse. Instead, it invites you to feel the quiet way endings often happen. Roads growing quieter, ceremonies thinning, a palace corridor filling with dust, A procession becomes a memory. A chant becomes an echo. A courtyard becomes a place where leaves gather. Historical context enters like fog, not forcing certainty. Angkor's gradual fading is believed to have many threads. Droughts that strained water systems, shifting rivers and changing monsoon patterns, wars and raids, political shifts, the slow fatigue of maintaining a vast city whose lifeblood was water and coordination. None of these arrive as a single verdict. They gather like clouds. They press gently until even stone begins to feel tired. And as people move slowly, quietly, away from the center, the jungle moves closer. Not in triumph, in patience. A doorway appears in your imagination, framed by vines like second gate. The stone lintel is still there, carved and solemn, but the green has learned its contours. Vines drape across it like ceremonial cloth. The opening becomes a threshold between worlds, one side human order, the other side living wilderness. The temple does not resist the veil. It wears it. A stone face emerges from moss. Its features soften under damp green growth, not erased, but gentled, like a memory smoothed by time. Small ferns root in the corners of carved eyes. Water beads on the cheeks after rain. The face looks less like a ruler now, less like a guardian of empire, and more like a quiet witness returning to the earth. A fallen column becomes a cradle for ferns. The column no longer holds a roof, it holds life. Its sandstone skin is wrapped in moss, its cracks filled with soil. The jungle takes what once stood upright and turns it into a bed for green breath. Nothing here is wasted. Nothing is discarded. Even ruin becomes a vessel. Beneath the silence, you begin to feel the idea of concealment as a sacred act. Not everything that disappears is destroyed. Some things are covered, protected, held. The jungle does not destroy Angkor the way fire destroys wood. It holds Angkor the way water holds a reflection, shimmering, shifting, still present even when it cannot be grasped. And perhaps this is why Angkor Wat, in particular, still feels as if it breathes. Because it was not simply abandoned. It was absorbed. Its edges blurred into mist. Its courtyards learned the language of rain. Its stones warmed and cooled under canopy shade. Its carvings gathered lichen like quiet script. The temple became part of the jungle's long rhythm, and the jungle became part of the temple's endurance. Whispers tell us that lost is not always the right word. Lost suggests absence. But here, presence remains, veiled, buried, crumbled, yes, yet still there, still breathing beneath green silence. As the chapter draws toward its closing, the wind continues its slow inhale and exhale through leaves. The light dims into dusk sky blue. Mist thickens in the distance, softening the outlines of towers until they resemble ghosts of geometry, barely held in the air. A distant bird calls once, then fades. And the final question is left gently on the water of the mind, unforced, like a lotus petal. What is truly lost? If it still breathes beneath the veil, perhaps it was never meant to be found in full clarity. Perhaps it was meant to be remembered in fragments, stone under moss, silence under rain, echo under leaves. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the jungle's breathing hush, Angkor listens back, quietly, patiently, until sleep arrives. It is said the causeway remembers every footstep, not as a list, not as a record written in ink, but as a feeling in the stone, an echo pressed into the worn surface, held there like warmth held in a brick after sunset. The opening image is footsteps, not one pair, but many, layered like faint ripples on still water. Some arrive in daylight with wide, curious eyes. Some come at dusk, moving slowly as if the air itself is sacred. Some carry bowls, some carry notebooks, some carry nothing at all except attention. Each arrival is another breath placed on the same ancient path. And beneath the silence, the temple receives them all. The listener is guided onto the causeway as though crossing centuries in a single slow walk. The stones underfoot are worn smooth where countless feet have pressed the same places again and again. The balustrades, carved and chipped, hold the same patient posture they have held for nearly a millennium. Water lies on either side, still and reflective, as if the moat is listening too. Whispers tell us Angkor Wat endures not only because it is built of stone, but because it is built of return. Long before modern eyes arrived, the Khmer world moved through these spaces with devotion woven into daily life. The temple rose under Suryavarman II in the early 12th century, dedicated to Vishnu, shaped as Mount Meru, ringed by the oceanic moat of myth. It was a sanctuary, and it was a statement, an empire speaking to the heavens through geometry, alignment, and carved story. Then time turned. The prayers changed, as prayers do. Hindu devotion softened into Buddhist practice over the centuries, not as a rupture, but as a gentle turning, one chant fading into another without breaking the temple's calm pulse. The causeway did not ask for a single name. It only asked for reverence. And then came the long silence, not a perfect emptiness, but thinning, roads quieter, ceremonies fewer, the jungle pressing closer with patient breath. In some places, vines learned the contours of doorways. In corners, dust gathered like a soft veil. The temple remained, but the world around it shifted, and Angkor's great city no longer held the same central flame. Where memory fades, stones keep listening. Later, outside eyes began to speak of rediscovery, as if a place that never stopped existing could suddenly return to existence simply because someone else noticed it. The word feels strange here, because Angkor did not vanish into nothing. It settled into a quieter visibility, half held by jungle and rain, half held by those who continued to come in reverence. And then the modern world arrived, carrying its own kind of devotion. Not incense, perhaps, but attention. Cameras lifted like small mechanical offerings. Notes written, measurements taken, repairs planned. The temple was studied, photographed, restored, touched by care, and touched by consumption. Yet the tone remained soft, because even this is another kind of echo. Each era arrives believing it is the first to truly see. Each era leaves believing it has captured something. But Angkor Wat does not feel captured. It feels alive, as though it is more than stone. The chapter holds its contradiction gently, like a fragile bowl. The temple is both revered and consumed, photographed, studied, repaired, yet its deepest atmosphere cannot be captured. You can carry away images, but not the cool hush of the corridors at dawn. You can record details, but not the way the light slides into a passage like a sacred thread. You can restore edges, but you cannot restore the original breath of the hands that carved them. And the emotional arc drifts from curiosity to quiet melancholy. What does it mean to preserve a place while also changing it? To repair a crack is to save stone, but also to alter the way time wrote itself there. To guide visitors is to protect, but also to turn pilgrimage into routine. To shine light is to reveal, but sometimes to dissolve the mystery that made the place sacred. Beneath the silence, the causeway keeps receiving footsteps. Some are slow, some hurried, some are reverent, some distracted. But the path remains the path. The water remains still. The temple remains watchful. As dusk settles, the air cools again. The sky darkens into dusk blue, and the towers lose their daytime sharpness, becoming silhouettes once more, soft geometry against the night's veil. The moat catches the first hints of moonlight, and the causeway becomes a darker line across the reflective water, like a thought turning inward. The last light fades from the stone, and the temple's presence feels heavier, not oppressive, only deep. And the final reflection arrives as implied forbidden knowledge, spoken softly enough to remain a question. Perhaps the temple chooses what it reveals. Perhaps it allows history to touch it, kingdoms, monks, scholars, visitors, but keeps its oldest breath hidden, deeper than restoration, deeper than names, deeper than the eyes that come looking. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully possessed. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the towers darken into the color of night, the causeway holds its quiet ripples of footsteps, layered, fading, endless, until even the listener's own thoughts begin to soften, and sleep approaches like mist over water. It is said that endings are not doors. They are circles. This final chapter opens at night, when Angkor Wat becomes a silhouette again, returning to the same hush from the beginning, as if the story has folded back into its own first breath. The towers rise dark against a dust-blue sky, their edges softened by mist, their lotus shapes closed in moonlight. The moat lies still, holding reflections like secrets, and the jungle at the edges exhales slowly, leaf by leaf. Beneath the silence, the temple feels asleep. Not abandoned, not empty. Asleep, as a great living form beneath the stars, resting in the way mountains rest, in the way oceans rest, in the way ancient things rest when they no longer need to prove they exist. The narrative focus is not explanation now, not solving, not naming. It is communion. The listener is invited to sit beside the water, to let the mind quiet, to feel Angkor Wat as presence rather than puzzle, something you do not take apart, but simply keep company with. Whispers tell us the temple becomes clearer when we stop demanding clarity. And so the chapter revisits its key symbols as a slow, dreamlike montage, each one returning softly, like a familiar refrain. Water reflecting starlight. The moat holds the sky again, star-marked and trembling, the constellations resting on the surface, as if the heavens have leaned down to listen. Lotus leaves float in the dark. A faint ripple passes, then stillness returns, as though the water is reminding you how to let thoughts pass without chasing them. Bas-reliefs whispering in shadow. Inside, corridors remain warm and quiet. Carvings stretch along walls like stone scripture. Celestial beings, spirals of myth, dancers frozen mid-breath. In torchlight's fading glow, the reliefs seem almost to move, but only because the mind is drifting, the way it drifts when sleep approaches. The library of images does not close with a final page. It simply becomes darker, softer, more indistinct, like memory. Steep stairs leading to wind. You remember the climb, the incline that tested intention, the way the temple asked you to slow down, to become humble in your body before you reach the higher chambers. Above, wind brushes the towers like a low chant, and the jungle spreads beneath like a sleeping animal. In this remembering, the stairs feel less like architecture and more like an inner path, each step a letting go, prayer changing without breaking. In dim sanctuaries, Buddhist statues sit beneath ceilings once meant for Vishnu, and the temple holds this transition without tension. One chant fades, another rises, and stone remains calm, not loyal to a single name, perhaps, but to devotion itself, the act of offering breath to what cannot be controlled. Jungle breathing at the edges. Outside, vines and moss continue their slow approach. Rain returns in its season. Roots press toward cracks with patient certainty. Yet this does not feel like destruction. It feels like being held. The jungle's veil is not a shroud. It is a covering that keeps the temple cool, damp, alive in its own way, protected from the harshness of complete exposure. The listener is guided to feel the temple's endurance as a kind of calm grief. Everything passes. Kings, empires, certainties, even prayers change their language. And still something remains to witness. Angkor Wat stands not as a triumph over time, but as a companion to time, kneeling before it, day after day, century after century, as sun and moon continue their quiet turning. Where memory fades, the temple continues to listen. This is the mystery, left intact, but softened. Less like a riddle to solve, more like a sacred ember carried in the chest, warm, quiet, enduring, not demanding explanation. You begin to sense that Angkor Wat can be many things at once without contradiction. A temple, a tomb, a map, a mirror. Yes, and perhaps also a listening chamber, holding echoes of devotion the way a shell holds the sea. You can lift the shell to your ear and hear something older than yourself, something that cannot be photographed or repaired into certainty. The night deepens. Dusk becomes full dark. The towers darken into the color of night, and the last traces of day fall away, like a garment gently set down. The moat becomes a deeper mirror, reflecting the moon as a pale coin of light. And the closing image is simple. The moon above the central lotus towers, steady, pale, and unhurried. The temple below, still there, breathing in silence, as if it will remain long after the last voice fades, long after footsteps leave the causeway, long after even the questions grow tired and dissolve into sleep. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps it was only meant to be returned to, again and again, until the mind quiets enough to hear what the stone has always been saying without words. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And now, in this gentle closing, the echo softens, then softens, until it becomes indistinguishable from the silence that carries you into rest.